Back and continuing with our leading story this afternoon. President Cyril Ramaphosa says government is still continuing to negotiate hard, must I say, with the United States as punitive tariff hikes kick in on South African goods. I'm joined now by Denise van Huyssteen, CEO of the Nelson Mandela Bay Business Chamber, on the impact that this will have on the province at large, as, of course, the Eastern Cape is one of those areas highly relied upon by the automotive sector. Denise, good to have you. Thank you very much for coming on this afternoon. Is the automotive sector the only sector that will be impacted here?
So our economy in the Eastern Cape, and especially here in Nelson Mandela Bay, is anchored around automotive and agri. So we'll be disproportionately impacted versus the rest of the country.
So when you look at the auto industry, I mean, is the expectation that you are going to see factories starting to shut down? And is that kind of the reaction that this tariff increase will have?
So there will be probably quite an immediate impact on those manufacturers that export directly to the US. So we do have an OEM that exports vehicles to the US, as well as some component manufacturers. But this is more than just a US versus SA trade issue. We see it more as a global issue because it's going to impact global manufacturing footprints and where the best locations are to assemble vehicles and components. And we're going to be in a less competitive position versus countries that have lower tariffs than ours. So this is going to become a fight for survival for manufacturing in our area.
Yeah. And is there a gap and an opportunity and space to then, instead of focusing on the US market, rather shift your trade relations elsewhere?
So shifting markets doesn't happen overnight. That takes time, first of all, and you also need economies of scale for manufacturing to succeed. What we do need to do is we need to strengthen our relationships with existing markets, such as in Europe and Southeast Asia. And then we also need to move with absolute speed to get free trade agreements in place with BRICS countries, because right now those relationships are based on us as South Africa sending raw materials to those countries, and then they send finished products to us. We also need to be in a position to send finished products to the BRICS countries. So that's an area where there needs to be accelerated focus.
Yeah. How diversified are our exports to the United States in terms of what we are sending to them compared to, as you put it, what we are sending to China and what we are sending to India?
Yeah, so what we're sending to the US is finished products. And what we're currently sending to places like China and India today is raw materials. And we need to, as South Africa, get more into beneficiation of products. So if you take the automotive industry as an example, we have completely knocked down assemblers in this country, which in turn create thousands of job opportunities. And then you have component suppliers around them that employ even more people. And then so the ecosystem around it, when you look at the impact. So if you take a city like Nelson Mandela Bay, our economy, our entire economy is linked to the automotive industry because of the knock-on effects through the various sectors.
Yeah. Is there something that government can put in the package, which I'm sure they're still putting their heads around what that support package is going to look like? For example, if something like tax breaks could be introduced in that particular package, could it assist to lessen the blow on the industry?
I think the government needs to do everything it can to continue to negotiate with the US so that we can try and get a more favorable trading conditions. Because we've got the highest tariffs out of all the countries on the African continent. So I think that work needs to continue. But in parallel with that, we have to work with other markets. We need to urgently get stronger trade relations in place so that we can try and diversify. But we also need to have more of a focus on protecting local. Right now in the country, you have some semi-knockdown assemblers that don't create the scale of employment opportunities as CKD manufacturing. And it's those kind of things that need to change to make sure that we protect local jobs and grow local jobs.
Do we have the infrastructure in place on that note of developing regional trade? I mean, do we have the infrastructure in place that is needed, for example, to implement something like the Africa Continent Free Trade Agreement?
Yeah, so I think as Nelson Mandela, we have an advantage. We're a two-port city. We've got a deep water port, and we do have a lot of infrastructure in place. We've obviously had inefficiencies around logistics these last few years, but there has been improvements in that regard. And if we truly want to be competitive on the African continent, we need to continue to accelerate the improvements in logistics, but also from a very basic level in terms of our enabling environment. We've seen municipalities across the country fail to deliver services. That needs to urgently be fixed, because you can't manufacture if you don't have reliable electricity, water, and so on. And when you look across the African continent, we've lost a lot of ground where South Africa used to have a huge advantage versus other countries. But when you look at North Africa, for example, countries like Morocco have actually overtaken our automotive manufacturing industry here. Also, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement hasn't moved fast enough to promote manufacturing. We need the rules of origin around automotive to be finalized. And we also need greater collaboration between countries, because it can't just be South Africa that wants to manufacture. We have to also enable other countries around us to manufacture so that we all support one another. And we shouldn't, as a continent, just be sending our raw materials out. We need to also manufacture finished goods.
Yeah. Let's talk then finally, as we wrap up, on the question of jobs. The Reserve Bank estimating this to have an impact on some 100,000 jobs. Are these going to be jobs purely in the manufacturing space in the Eastern Cape, or maybe further down the value chain?
So we've already seen some manufacturers close down or restructure, retrench, or put people on short time. So that is already happening, unfortunately. And then I think the primary initial impact would be in your directly impacted manufacturers, but then it has a knock-on impact in terms of service providers into those manufacturers. So it won't just be limited to those that are in the automotive industry.
Appreciate your time, Denise. And that is Denise van Huyssteen, CEO of the Nelson Mandela Bay Business Chamber, on the impact of these tariffs, particularly in the Nelson Mandela Bay area in the Eastern Cape.